the idea of leadership versus management. And admittedly, that was not a distinction that I had really pondered before you kind of mentioned it to me. You had talked about basically how what we are used to, at least in the last several decades, and when it comes to presidents, when it comes to government, the bureaucracy, and the whole shebang, is you go far enough back in time, George Washington, Ming Dynasty, Julius Caesar, and there are these examples of great leaders. What we've gotten now is, under the fruits of their labor, we've set the stage for it to be sort of taken over by managers.
Exactly.
And myself, I always kind of assumed they were one and the same. The best managers make good leaders, the best leaders make good managers. It's a synonym. One just means the other. But you kind of brought to light, at least for me, the distinction between the two. Would you go into that, expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and again, this is something that's evolved since World War II. It used to be that leadership was much easier when everybody was white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. It was pretty easy to be a leader because everyone was kind of on the same page. Yeah, I suppose the Scottish didn't like the Irish because the Irish were Catholic. And in 1900, there were signs saying Irish need not apply. But when you think about it, most of our immigrants, when we had 120 million people, they were all from Europe. They were all white. Many were Anglo-Saxon. Many were Protestant. Yeah, we can argue that the Methodists are different than the Lutherans, but certainly it was a much more homogenous group. So everyone kind of had the same values. So leadership was pretty easy. So what happened since World War II? Well, number one, there was the boom in the 50s where everyone got drunk with wealth. And so when the middle class exploded in the 1950s, you had a lot of people with a lot of money. So the middle class weren't beholden to their employers for jobs. So people started saying, hey, I want what I want. I got my own house. I got my own car, house in the suburb, little pink houses for you and me. My wife, runs around with the ladies at the country club. I mean, we didn't all of a sudden, we were very independent. We were very self-sufficient. And then in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson came in with his Great Society idea. And again, I'm not being critical of it, but it did change the landscape in that a lot more freedoms existed for minorities. People who were not in leadership positions or were not in management positions all of a sudden had some power, right? Whether it be no gender discrimination, no age discrimination, no ethnic, no race, no religion discrimination. The Great Society kind of put us all on the same playing field. So that became much more hard to lead, right? And then in the 70s, you had women's liberation. I was in corporate America. I was at a place called Avon Products during the 70s, and women were in the workplace for the first time, not just as secretaries, nurses, and teachers, but you'd have a director of marketing who was a woman who had gone to school and was your boss. And so I was kind of raised, I was young at that point, so I was kind of raised working for women. But a lot of the older guys really couldn't deal with it. I mean, they felt women are meant to be home, barefoot and pregnant. They're not supposed to be at work. So it became more difficult to lead people of color, to lead women when you had grown up where it was just a men's club, a boys' club, right? And then in the 1980s, you had a lot of international globalization. You had companies like Honda building a plant in Timmonsville, South Carolina, and making recreational vehicles. And then all of a sudden, you had Japanese management culture, leadership principles. That complicated things. And then finally, in the 90s, you had technology. Technology exploded. Everyone had a computer. Everyone had access to information. The internet exploded. There were things like, Google and YouTube. And so it became very hard to be a leader because basically the followers didn't want to take direction. It's kind of like when I tell my kid, don't go out in the cold after you've been sweating in the gym, he'll reference WebMD and he'll say, "Dad, that's a wives' tale." You don't get colds from having open pores and sweating. I'm not going to put on my sweatshirt. So it's harder to be a leader among children when they can access the internet. So basically, there are a lot of really, really good reasons why it's become very, very difficult to lead nowadays. And as much as we might say, well, the Polish are different from the Italians, who are different from the French and the Germans, they still were all Christian. Now we have Hindus, we have Buddhists, we have Muslims, right? We have people from Asia, we have people Hispanics. We don't have a common set of values that everyone buys into. No matter what you say, there's someone who's saying, that's not my experience, that's not my value, that's not my religion, that's not my belief. So there's a legitimately more difficult job to be a leader nowadays. And so while management is planning, organizing, evaluating, leadership is more like creating a vision, inspiring, convincing people that they should do something as opposed to making them do it out of fear. All managers had to say is do that or you'll be fired. Now, if you say you'll be fired, they'll say, so what? I'll get another job. You see what I'm saying? They've lost the ability to manage they've lost the ability to lead with the stick, and the carrot doesn't matter anymore. So it's a whole new set of abilities to be able to inspire. And I think, we could say, of course, Lincoln was a leader. Unfortunately, we could say Hitler was a leader. FDR was a leader, even though we might not agree with his policies. And LBJ tried to become a leader. Kennedy tried to become a leader. But since Kennedy and LBJ, I think Trump has been the first president who is showing signs of meeting the new definition of leadership. Why? Because he has a vision. Make America great again. Put America first. That is a vision. The same way, the Emancipation Proclamation was a vision. I Have a Dream was a vision. The Great Society is a vision. We want to get to the moon before 1970. Those are the things that the average manager is doing too busy putting out fires on a daily basis. They don't even think in those terms, and that's why we find ourselves chasing our tail and just going day to day without any improvement, without any innovation, without any creativity, without any sense of making things special. America was always founded as that shining light on the hill. It was special. We're going to give people freedom. And that's a concept that, we've kind of lost because I don't think there's anyone willing to face the slings and arrows of what it is. I mean, we're seeing what happened with Elon Musk. He's standing up there and saying, hey, we're wasting a lot of money. There's fraud, there's corruption, there's inefficiency. And boy, they are lining up to attack him. Well, that's what happens with leaders. And who really wants to, subject themselves to that? Trump is an unusual character. He's got thick skin. He doesn't mind it. Musk has FU money, so he doesn't care. But, basically, the average politician, the average teacher, the average coach, the average professor, they don't want their life to be that difficult. So they just go along for the ride, go with the flow.
Like you talked about how it used to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country, and with the more diversity of everything, not just racial demographics, but religious demographics. You brought up how Honda set up a factory in Timminsville. Industrial demographics, different ways of conducting business. All this diversification has led to people's mindset now is what appeals in a democracy, what appeals to the most amount of people? Well, the more types of ideas, the more types of different, beliefs and whatever, the more types of people. What is considered acceptable is continuously watered down.
That's exactly, yes. That's the watering down of it is what I think makes it less essential. Mm-hmm. No one likes watered down anything. Unless it's water.
Right.
And so I almost feel like there's a pejorative sense to our culture. And that brings up another point, Josh. I would have to say that management is much more consistent with human nature. Okay? Human nature is what's in it for me, what's easiest for me. I got to worry about myself. I can only worry about myself. Human nature is normal, common, human. Leadership is a little bit more akin to divine nature. And one of the things I always reference, as many chances as I can, is Jesus Christ the man. We can talk about the Messiah, the Savior, the Son of God. We can talk about all the religious stuff, the resurrection, etc. But in an academic sense, I tend to talk about Jesus Christ, CEO. Jesus Christ, the CEO of Christianity. And if you realize the time he was born, right, everything was legalistic. Everything was intellectual. Everything was laws. Everything was thinking. And he introduced this wild concept of love, right? Well, turn the other cheek. Don't ask for an eye for an eye. You know, be your brother's keeper. Love thy neighbor. You know, forgiveness is divine. And so in many ways, leadership is more of a divine approach where you're thinking of the other person before you're thinking of yourself. And that kind of goes against human nature. I mean, if you think about it from the religious point of view, you know, we're humans who are trying to get to heaven, right? We're trying to get up to a divine nature by living a good life. But that's kind of hard to focus on it when life is so hard day to day. And so one of the reasons I don't criticize people for managing their life or managing their job is because that is really human nature. You know, like Springsteen said, you know, we're waiting for a savior to rise from these streets. Well, the reason there's only been one Christ in the last 2,000 years, because it's kind of hard. You know,
right.
the reason there's been only one Trump in the presidency in our generation is it's really hard to stand up against all the forces that you're threatening. So the people who are objecting to what he's trying to do with cost saving or the border, those are people who are worried about their own human self-interest being threatened. They're not able to think beyond themselves. What's in it for me? They're not thinking about their grandchildren. They're not thinking about the people who genuinely are in need of a shakeup or need of a different way of looking things. And again, I don't blame people for that, but I'm not going to call them leaders.